New Explorer Corps, First Arm, Spinward Operations Area, System J5381, Zenith Jump Point, March 14th, 3152. Being faster than everything aimed at her was euphoric. It was a running theme in May's existence, going back to the days in grade school when the bullies couldn't catch her as she sprinted around the playground, leaping over equipment, running around the legs of her instructors, and usually laughing the whole time. She wasn't laughing now, though, even as she sprinted her commando through the light forest, dodging trees and exchanging fire with vehicles in pursuit. May's parents had originally pushed her toward dance, and for a while that was her entire world. Dreams of moving gracefully to music on some grand stage on Luthien filled her dreams. At least, they did until May saw her first holovid of a fight between two battlemechs. She was walking through her grade school academy when the cheers from the cafeteria caught May's attention. Walking in with her backpack on her shoulder, her black hair tightly bound into a braid, and holding her dance shoes, May watched in awe as the holovid projection showed the twists and turns of a battle between two Mechwarriors on some unnamed planet. A light mech that she later learned was called a Jenner ran with such grace that it almost looked to be dancing between the explosions around it. It twisted and turned and leapt into the air on jets of plasma fire. The mech firing at her was clearly having trouble, and just firing out of frustration, hoping that something would hit. Just when May thought that the Jenner would be running forever, it turned and bared down on its opponent, a panther painted in dark gray camo. SRMs and lasers cut through the panther's armor as it reeled and tried to fall back. However, the Jenner was on it like a predator catching its prey. As the cheers and jeers rose up around her in the cafeteria, May knew that she was destined to be a Mechwarrior. Convincing her parents was a challenge, but eventually they gave in. Her father was the last domino to fall when he found May organizing the other kids in their neighborhood into a mock mech battle using sticks and thrown plastic bottles. After that, being a Mechwarrior was all that May ever wanted. It was her singular purpose that drove her, kept her out of trouble, and helped her get through life's trials and tribulations. When her mother passed away, May had her studies at the War Academy to distract her. When her father followed a few years later, May was finishing up her first 2-year deployment as a rookie Mechwarrior in the DCMS. Being a Mechwarrior was always the distraction that could help her get through whatever life sent her way. That's why she was running through the forest in her commando. Dodging missiles, lasers, and bolts of bright blue PPC fire was preferable to thinking about how she had lost Ariana. For the first time in her life, there had been another destiny in addition to her first, but it was stolen away. May's teeth ground together as she twisted and banked hard, bringing the commando back around to fire at the closest tank, a swift J. Edgar. Its laser shots missing completely in the commando's turn, the hovercraft tried to bank away from the approaching mech, but May used their shock to close in like a predator on its kill. She fired all 10 of her SRMs into the hovercraft, which shuddered from the multiple impacts. Before it could recover, May pushed to full acceleration and slammed her mech's foot into the crippled hovercraft. Armor buckled, tore, and was blown away as the vehicle shuddered and was ripped into pieces by the rushing battlemech. May roared as the commando stumbled, but she was able to keep it upright and running toward the next target. The 35-ton blade pushed through the undergrowth, finally catching up with the fight. May's eyes narrowed as she watched the mech lift and aim its rotary autocannon at her mech. The flashes from the weapon were prelude to the geysers of earth kicked up around her. May felt the shudder of impacts on her mech, and a quick glance down at her screens showed she had caught some leg armor in the first shot. "Keep going. Close on it. Go," May told herself out loud as she continued to run toward the blade in an angled sprint. She heard the welcomed beep of her SRMs finishing off their reloading cycle and aimed her targeting reticle at the center of mass. May added the medium laser to the mix as the SRMs peppered the armor of the blade. It shuddered from the impacts, but it did not falter. More autocannon rounds hit around the commando, with only a few glancing blows. At 50 meters, May split to the left, dodging another series of autocannon rounds while also letting loose with another 10 SRMs. This time, the missiles dug deep into the blade's torso armor. Explosions briefly bathed the mech in fire and set it off balance. The mech stumbled into a tree, which shuddered from the weight but did not break. Circling closer, 30 meters, 20, 10, the 2 medium lasers danced across the commando, scoring a hit and leaving twin scars across her mech's torso, but it was too late for that. May growled with determination, now drenched with sweat as she pushed her mech to the limit. The blade tried to turn to get a close-range shot off with a rotary autocannon, but May was faster. With the commando's hand up, she ran past the blade. She felt the shudder as her mech's fingers closed around the blade's exposed ammo feed, and then was slammed back against her restraints of her jump seat as the two mechs were yanked to the ground. May saw stars for a moment, but quickly shook her head as she looked up at the forest canopy above. Knowing this fight wasn't over, she twisted the commando to get a shot at it. The blade was on its back, and the belted autocannon feed was spewing AC-5 rounds up into the sky. They rained back down onto the prone mech and clattered to the ground around it. Lining up her laser, May fired into the pile of ammo just a few meters away. Instantly, the screens went blank, and the fans kicked in around May to siphon off the heat generated by the simulator to enhance realism. May simply closed her eyes and let the goosebumps form on her sweaty skin. You know, it's usually a bad idea to set off an ammo explosion when you're right next to it. A voice May immediately recognized as the captain interrupted her moment of simulated death. The blade was knocked out, yes, May responded. Oh, very much so, May. We need to talk, Rin said in a concerned tone. May unbuckled her harness and stood on slightly shaky legs. After hours of stationary sim practice, the muscles needed a minute to remember they had a purpose. I'll be out in a minute. When May climbed out of the simulator, Captain Rin was standing there holding a towel. May accepted it and wiped the sweat from her face before saying, I can't stay on this mission. The mission needs you. I'm sorry about Ariana. I really am. This is much bigger than us, Rin said. May looked at Rin, taking in her disheveled looks for a few moments before responding, I think you're in over your head, and it's going to get a lot more people killed by the end of this. Rin's brow furrowed, and she reached up to push her glasses higher up on her nose. I know what I'm doing, but without you, people are at risk. We need you. This time it was May's turn to balk. She looked around the simulator bay and settled her gaze on Rin again before asking, What are you going to do about Kip and Olivia? I've asked Olivia to keep to her bunk for now. Kip has been living in the flight bay. I think we need a distraction from what happened. That's why we're in this system. I have some data that suggests there's something big to be found. That's why I need you. I'd like you to come with me to check it out, Rin said in a slightly excited tone. We need you. If I go, it's my last run. I'm still gone when we get back to the Combine, May conceded. If that's what you want to do when we return, I won't stop you. I'll even honor your contract and you can keep your commando, Rin said as she took May's hand in hers. May looked into Rin's face and was a little put off by the slightly too wide smile on it. Deal. New Explorer Corps. First Arm, Spinward Operations Area, System J5381, Zenith Jump Point, March 14th, 3152. Down in the mech bay, Tenica and Vasil were helping Akif with the repairs to the Thunderbolt. The three of them agreed that if anything could lift Olivia's spirits, it would be seeing her beloved mech back in one piece and ready to get into the fight. At the moment, the Thunderbolt's leg was reattached, but with new myomere cables that made up the mech's musculature were being temperamental. Covered in grime and grease, Vasil helped without complaint, though Tenica could see he was favoring his uninjured hand. We need a break, Tenica said as she slid down the gantry. Let's grab a drink. I'll be there in a bit. I just want to get these cables right so I don't have to worry about them, Akif said as he dangled from his harness behind the Thunderbolt's knee. Come on, Vasil, I'm buying. She playfully punched up to hit Vasil in the shoulder, and he looked down at her and grunted. The bay had a simple galley kitchen, cooler and table, where the two of them sat down with drinks that tasted somewhat like fruit-infused water. How are your fingers doing? Tenica said, gesturing towards the bandaged digits on Vasil's hand. Minor burns. They will be healed soon, Vasil replied, holding up his index finger and middle finger in a V shape. How are you other than that? Tenica asked as she took another sip. I'm fine. Yourself? Vasil responded in his usual Spartan prose. I'm still a little bit shook up from what happened. I've never actually seen anyone die up close like that before, Tenica admitted. Vasil nodded slowly, taking in the comment and letting it stew for a few moments before responding. That is a benefit of being a Mechwarrior. You have distance between actions and consequences. I guess, Tenica said. They sat there for almost a minute before she spoke again to break the silence. Can you tell me how you ended up out here? Vasil looked down into Tenika's eyes before he said, I do not think that will improve your mood. We're friends. Friends back each other up. I want to know more about you, Tenika said as she reached out to place her hand on his arm. Vasil's eyes fell to the raptor tattoo on her arm, and he started to talk. Jade Falcon Occupation Zone, Orkney System, 25 kilometers outside New Hampshire City, November 3rd, 3151. Well away from the bustling city, hidden among the dusty rock and crystalline formations for which the planet is known, a series of small buildings was nestled. Behind a chain-link fence and signs that warned outsiders to keep away, Point Commander Vasil stood in his office looking over the concerning data arriving from the Spaceport Police Garrison. Multiple jump ships had arrived in the system and had launched a half-dozen dropships now heading toward Orkney. If they were a clan, Vasil expected a challenge for the planet. If they were Lyran or some other Innersphere units, he expected no challenge at all before the bombs started to fall. Any retribution aimed at the Falcons would likely be devastating. Not that it mattered. There were just a few hundred Jade Falcons left on the planet, and not a single functional battle mech with which to defend it. Whoever these invaders were, the fight would be short. For the first time since the choice was made, Vasil reconsidered his decision to remain behind as the Jade Falcon Tumen left for Terra. Those thoughts lingered in his mind for all of a second before Vasil reminded himself that Malvina Hazen was a lunatic, and that he would surely have died in some dishonorable attack that was meaningless in the end. Staying on Orkney to watch over the Sibco had meaning. There was honor in helping these young Falcons learn what it meant to be a warrior, even if it guaranteed that his own days as a warrior were likely over. Vasil often found himself pondering things in a way that most Jade Falcons did not. In his youth, one of his instructors commented that there must be some Ghost Bear genes in Vasil's mix. It wasn't intended to be a compliment. Still, Vasil made his choice to remain behind when the rest of the Falcons moved on to Terra. He suffered the mocking and disgusted looks from his fellow elementals without response. If they wanted to go die for Malvina, that was their choice and their destiny. In the silence following the departure of the Falcons from the planet, Vasil threw himself into his job of training the young Falcons of the Sibco. There were a dozen Trueborn Falcons, all just past their 13th year. 8 of them were destined for trials to be a Mechwarrior, and the other 4 were bred elementals from their stature and bulk. Training was significantly curtailed after the rest of the Falcons left with every battle mech, repair part, and suit of battle armor they could find. Thankfully, Vasil had done a good job of squirreling away his armor just in case it was needed. As he walked outside and looked up into the stars as if he might be able to see the dropships still days away, he wondered how long he would be able to wear it before being gunned down by these invaders. At least he'd get a chance to die in battle after all. "Falconer Vasil, is everything all right?" A young voice broke through Vasil's contemplative thought. He looked back to see Ayes Taylor standing at the doorway to the barracks wearing her Mechwarrior trainer jumpsuit. "Wake everyone up. We have a mission," Vasil said, crossing his arms and looking back up at the starry night. 2 days later, 2 dropships descended into the New Hampshire City spaceport. Vasil and the others watched from the distant safety of a rock outcropping in a ridge near the Sibco complex. There were flashes of laser fire and a couple of explosions from missiles, but they stopped quickly. Confirming the invaders were hostile, Vasil turned to the 12 ASs and spoke through his armor's external speaker. "We have to go east. There is a supply depot there that could have something left behind that we could use to defend ourselves. If not, we will continue on to Jamestown and hopefully find passage off-planet," he said as he looked over their young faces. Some looked concerned while others were ready to rush out and fight barehanded. The group of fledgling Falcons and their Falconer turned their backs to New Hampshire and their Sibco, hiking quickly through the mountains to the east, each carrying food and water to last the 3-day hike to the depot. Vasil trailed the column, frequently looking back to check for signs of attack. After the 2nd day, the mountains gradually turned into rolling highlands, and Vasil knew they were getting close. By that point, the IASs were tired and a bit sleep-deprived, but none would ever admit to it. After all, they were aspiring Jade Falcon warriors. They would do what is asked of them and more. Finding a good spot to rest for a few hours under the shade and protection of a crystal and rock outcropping, the group ate and rested in silence. Over Vasil's comms, he heard a chirp before an incoming message. He was curious, and so he listened to it. To any and all Clan Jade Falcons left on this planet, this is Star Captain Nafim Johnston of the Hell's Horses. Any resistance is to stop immediately, and you shall turn yourselves over to us for processing. Any guerrilla actions would dishonor your clan, and will be met with lethal and overwhelming force," the voice said in a tone that dripped with arrogance. Vasil weighed his options. Looking over at the young cadets in his care, they were in no position to fight anyone. But why send out this message at all? Surely the captured at the starport would have told the horses that there were no defensive forces on the planet. "We need to get moving," Vasil said as he stood up in his armor. The Yayases quickly packed up and the group began to move in double time toward the depot in the distance, which was no more than a speck on the horizon marked with a green arrow on Vasil's heads-up display. After an hour of jogging, the building was close enough to see the gated fence was open. "Go. Get inside, now," Vasil growled as he picked up the sound of a tracked vehicle behind them. The dozen young falcons ran onto the ferrocrete of the depot and into the hangar, which was reinforced ferrocrete with turned to face the threat. Moments later, a Hell's Horses tank roared over the crest of the hill and turned directly toward where Vasil was standing. He let his targeting computer soak in the tank's data, calculating its speed, class, and range. The Yenyo was a 55-ton medium tank built around an XL engine and a large pulse laser. In addition to the laser, it had 3 Streaks, SRM-6s, and 2 machine guns. Vasil calculated his chance of survival against it to be roughly 10% if he charged at it now. For now, he waited as the tank slowed and came to a stop roughly 200 meters away from his position. Over the open comlink, Vasil heard the voice from earlier say, "Point Commander Vasil, you are my bondsman, along with any Sibco cadets you have with you. Your suffering as a weak and cowardly Jade Falcon is over." Vasil stood motionless, not reacting to the insult, though he fought every fiber of his being that wanted to send him running, screaming at the tank. He bit his tongue for now and responded, "I am wary of accepting the word of a Hell's Horses warrior who would use such an inappropriate amount of force against a single elemental and unarmed children." "Ah yes, that's lovely. You are alive in there after all. What a delight. Do you wish to bait me into some mismatched personal duel outside of my vehicle? I'm afraid that I'm not quite that stupid. Stand down and take off that armor before I shoot it off and grind those baby birds under my tracks," the voice replied with a level of glee that disturbed Vasil. The Enyo and the Elemental stared each other down for a dozen wordless seconds before Vasil said, "If you guarantee on the honor of Kerensky that you will take in these cadets and give them a chance at trials to become warriors, I will stand down. However, I cannot be your bondsman." "Well bargained and done. Let's deal with that last part first," the voice gleefully replied as the turret fired. A large pulse laser's red beam cut across the open ground and seared the light grass into vapor, beyond where Vasil had been standing a fraction of a second before. Pumping his legs hard, Vasil closed the distance between him and the tank, counting down the meters before he could fire his jump jets and land on its armored hide. As he moved, Vasil counted on the Streak SRMs having a hard time locking onto a single elemental. Luckily, they did not fire. The tank turned a bit to bring its machine guns to bear. Both streams of machine gun fire cut furrows into the dirt around Vasil as he ran. A few rounds bounced off his sloped armor, with several striking true. Warning lights began to glow as the suit warned of stresses in the plate, but he still ran on. At 100 meters, Vasil triggered his jump jets and rose on a plume of smoke and fire. As he came down, his suit picked up a missile tracking from behind him. It flew by the tank and impacted the hill beyond it. At the last second, the tank veered to the right, and Vasil was forced to land on the ground just behind the tank, which was now accelerating toward the depot. Shifting his weight and turning toward the tank, Vasil saw the Ayases trying to set up a small, crude weapon at the door of the hangar. 2 of the kids were fiddling with the Manpack SRM launcher, trying to reload it quickly. Vasil yelled into the comm as he raised his arm to fire his small laser at the tank, now leaving him behind in a dust cloud. "Do not do that. Go back inside. You cannot help." Vasil fired his jump jets again, trying to catch the tank, which was now aiming directly at the depot. On the open comm, the Hell's Horses star captain laughed and said, On second thought, let's just wipe the slate clean. Vasil landed with a hard thud, only to jump again. His muscles ached as he pushed his armor to the limit. His eyes went wide as he watched the Enyo fire at the doors of the depot, with 18 Streak SRMs and the large pulse laser. "Strike, bandit scum!" Vasil roared. As the tank started to turn back towards Vasil, he landed directly on top of the turret. Operating on pure rage and adrenaline by this point, he sank his claws into the metal plating just behind the laser turret. He pulled back as hard as he could and didn't stop, even after his suit started registering stress fractures in his suit's musculature. "You are dishonorable filth," Vasil growled as he aimed his small laser into the gap he created and fired the weapon. The small laser bored through the exposed internals and into the mechanisms of the large pulse laser. Glowing with molten slag, the weapon would be useless. As if an instinctual response, the Enyo picked up speed and then swerved hard in an attempt to knock the elemental from its back. He fell but still clung to the tank, now dangling off the turret over the set of SRM tubes. Looking down, Vasil saw the machine gun on the left side of the tank, tracking frantically looking for a target. With a hard stomp, his battle-armored foot crashed down on the barrels, bending them to the point of uselessness. "Reinforcements will be here soon. You'll die anyway, Falcon scum," the Star Commander growled into the comm as he jerked the tank from side to side in order to dislodge Vasil. Letting go with his claw just long enough to drop down and duck under the swinging turret barrel, Vasil began to hammer down into the body of the vehicle. He pulled at armor, fired his laser into the hole, only to rip and tear more. All the while, his rage was insatiable. Finally, he felt as if he was getting close, and the tank suddenly jerked to a stop. Vasil stumbled and fell down the front of the vehicle, though he was able to cling on. A much less confident voice from the Star Commander came over the comlink saying, "You fought with honor. Let's make a deal." Vasil didn't respond on the comlink. He simply climbed back up to where he was working and jammed his metallic fist through the last bit of internal structure and into the tank's cabin. When he pulled his arm from the hole, he could see down into the cabin lit red. Without hesitation, he aimed his small laser into the hole and fired. New Explorer Corps, First Arm, Spinward Operations Area, System J5381, Zenith Jump Point, March 14th, 3152. Tenica took in Vasil's story in awe, though she kept searching for some sign of emotion in his face and found none. He recounted it with the cool and collected manner she had grown to respect, but she knew there was hurt behind the facade. "Did any of the cadets make it?" Tenica asked as she squeezed Vasil's hand. Vasil shook his head and said, "They all died as true Jade Falcons. They showed courage when none was expected. I should have considered that in my actions." "That sounds suspiciously like you blame yourself," Tenica responded. "Ultimately, I was responsible for them. I failed," Vasil said in a matter-of-fact way that was off-putting to Tenica. "You charged a tank to try to save them. You could have abandoned them and no one would ever have known, but you didn't. You fought for them." "I could have done more. I could have done things differently," Vasil said with a slight crack in his voice. Wanting nothing more than to cradle this giant of a human in her arms, Tenica stood up. Even with him still in his chair, the two of them were now at eye level. She leaned in, pressing her forehead against Vasil's, and stared into his eyes. "You retain your honor. You fought for them. You fought for me. You'll keep fighting until you can't, and then a little bit more after that. Understand me, soldier?" Tenica said in as authoritative tone as she could. Vasil's eyes tracked back and forth between her left and right eye for a few moments, at that extremely close distance, before he responded, "Yes." End Part 12. I hope you enjoyed today's entry, which provides a little backstory for two of our plucky band of adventurers. If you have thoughts on events, predictions of the future, or just comments in general, feel free to drop them in the section below. Don't forget to hit all the buttons if you enjoyed this, so that I can enjoy the dopamine hit that comes from seeing numbers get slightly bigger. Big thanks to the Ko-Fi folks who are directly supporting the channel and content like this. Take care, and until I see you again, go make the world a slightly better place today and tomorrow.